Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the affluent suburb of Wellington Heights, order and perfection weren't just habits, they were a code of conduct. The lawns looked like they'd stepped out of a gardening catalog, a brilliant green, without a single weed. The hedges were trimmed with military precision, as if the slightest overhanging branch might disturb the collective harmony. The driveways were swept every morning, the mailboxes gleamed, and the residents, seemingly smiling, observed everything, especially anyone who didn't part of the decor. Ava Reynolds, 56, divorced for 10 years, had lived in the neighborhood for more than 2 decades. She was a thin, dry-faced woman, always perfectly dressed, who boasted that she had seen the birth of every house in this place. She had no close friends, but everyone knew her. She was one of those neighbors you greeted out of politeness but were afraid to upset. In the neighborhood, she was referred to informally as the eye of the neighborhood, or sometimes, among younger people, as the guardian of the invisible gate, that mental threshold crossed at their peril by those without the right face, the right tone, or the right story. That Saturday morning, a soft sun bathed the white facades and wrought iron fences. A light breeze rustled the leaves, and Ava, faithful to her ritual, watered her rosebushes methodically, one hand on her hip, the other holding her garden hose like a scepter. She wore crisp beige leggings, a perfectly ironed pink polo shirt, and a pearly headband in her pulled-back blonde hair. It was the kind of morning when everything seemed in its right place. But suddenly, something disturbed the visual balance. A figure she didn't recognize. A tall young black woman, her hair braided in a neat bun, walked slowly along the sidewalk, a hardcover book in hand, a brown leather bag slung over her shoulder. She wore a simple navy blue dress and flat sandals, and exuded a discreet, almost poetic presence. But for Ava, the image didn't fit. Her gaze hardened immediately. She had never seen her before. And in her world, that was enough. Anyone lost again? She muttered in annoyance. She squinted, following the young woman's every step. Yet the young woman seemed perfectly calm, looking at the house numbers as if she knew where she was going. Ava put down her hose, wiped her hands on a white cloth folded in her pocket, and took a step toward the edge of her lawn, as if she wanted to see better, or judge better. She watched the young woman stop in front of the house across the street, that of her own father, Judge Harold Reynolds, a man once renowned for his balanced decisions and moral rectitude. Since his retirement, he had lived alone in this large gray house with white shutters, surrounded by books, memorabilia, and an old Labrador. Ava frowned. The young woman rummaged in her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a key. She hesitated for a moment, as if to make sure she had the right number. Then she raised her hand to the lock. It was too much. Without further thought, Ava returned to her deck, grabbed her cell phone, and dialed 911. Her voice was calm, but filled with icy certainty. Yes, hello. I'm reporting a suspicious person in our neighborhood. A young African-American woman, she seems to be hanging around near houses. She tried to enter the one across the street. She took one last look through the hedges. Her gaze was hard, firm, convinced that she was acting for the greater good. She hadn't asked any questions. She hadn't asked the young woman anything. She had only seen a skin color, an unfamiliar gait, and in her mind, that was enough for a crime to be prepared. What Ava didn't know was that this simple call would shake the image she had of herself, her family, and the world she thought she controlled. 10 minutes later, the quiet roar of a patrol car shattered the feigned tranquility of Wellington Heights. The vehicle stopped a few meters away, and 2 uniformed officers got out. One was young, obviously new to the job, the other, older, wore the attitude of someone who thinks they've seen it all. Ava spotted them from her porch. She quickly pushed her sunglasses back on, straightened her shoulders, and briskly walked down the few steps to her porch, a small smile on her face. That's her. Over there, by the gray house, she said, pointing with chilling confidence, as if indicating a misplaced garbage bag. The 2 agents nodded, one taking the lead, the other already consulting his notebook. They approached Imani with purposeful steps, their postures changing subtly, neither aggressive nor relaxed, just ready for anything, as one is when approaching an uncertain situation, but tinged with stereotypes. Imani saw them arrive without surprise. She had heard the sound of the car. She recognized the way one of them instinctively placed his hand near her belt, as if by automatism. She was standing straight, her bag closed, her book against her. "Hello, miss. May we know what you are doing here?" The tone was neutral, but the implication carried weight. Imani, 23, a brilliant third-year law student at UCLA, knew exactly how to respond, not just as a citizen, but as a young black woman accustomed to having to justify her presence. She calmly looked up at them, then opened her bag slowly, methodically, respectfully. "Here's my driver's license. And here's my student card." The policeman glanced over. He read in a low voice, "Imani Walker," then Imani added, in a soft but firm voice, "I came to see my grandfather. He lives here, in this house. Judge Harold Reynolds." A silence. A slight hesitation in the air. The two police officers exchanged a glance. And that's when Ava, who had been following the retreating officers like a school principal overseeing a playground, started to laugh. A dry, pinched, almost nervous laugh. "That's absurd. This house is my father's. And I don't know you, young lady." She emphasized the words, "my father," as if this statement invalidated any possibility that Imani was telling the truth. As if biology, legitimacy, and family history necessarily passed through her, and only her. The younger police officer looked down at the documents for a moment, then handed them back to Imani. "You said Judge Reynolds is your grandfather? Do you have any proof of this family connection? A message, a call?" Imani showed no signs of panic. On the contrary. She knew the truth would eventually come out. She took a deep breath, then reached into her pocket to pull out her phone. "I can call him. He was expecting me. I just arrived a little early." She started to dial the number when a dull squeak caught everyone's attention. The front door of the house slowly opened. A figure appeared in the frame, silhouetted against the morning light. The man was tall, slightly stooped with age, but his presence still commanded respect. He wore beige canvas trousers, a white open-collared shirt, and leaned on a dark wooden cane. His gray hair was combed back, and his eyes, lively despite the weight of years, scanned the scene. It was Judge Harold Reynolds. Old Judge Harold Reynolds slowly descended the steps of his porch. His step was no longer as sure as it once had been, but his bearing remained straight, noble, and imposing. Each movement of his cane struck the wood like an echo of the past, that of a man who, for decades, had dispensed justice without trembling, without bending, even in the face of storms. His face bore the marks of time, deep wrinkles, thin, slightly blotchy skin, but his eyes had not changed. They still shone with that keen intelligence, that implacable lucidity, and that firmness that had made his reputation in every court of the state. He walked slowly towards the group. A light breeze made the hems of his shirt dance, but his gaze was still, sharp. He placed a gentle hand on Imani's shoulder, then looked up at her with obvious, almost fatherly tenderness. "Faith, my dear granddaughter. You have finally arrived." The silence that followed this sentence was almost supernatural. Ava, frozen a few meters away, took a step back as if someone had just slapped her. "Dad, what?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a mixture of surprise, hurt, and something else, deeper, a confused panic, a disruption of the tidy view she'd always had of her family. The judge turned slowly to her, his face hardening as his words took shape. "Imani is Sarah's daughter." Ava blanched. She shook her head, a nervous laugh playing on her lips, as if it were impossible. "Sarah. Your daughter? You mean, the daughter you had with that black woman?" She had spat out the words without even realizing it, as if the very idea of a black family bond destabilized the sacred genealogical order she had invented for herself. The silence that followed was even heavier. It stretched. One could hear the rustling of leaves in the distance, the wheels of a child's bicycle, a hesitant bird. Harold nodded slowly, without shame or embarrassment. Yes. That black woman, as you say, was named Lena. She was a brilliant woman. Courageous. An artist. And Sarah was born from our love. A love you always refused to accept. A sister you refused to meet. Ava looked down, unable to meet his gaze. You knew. You knew I had trouble understanding this story. Why didn't you ever tell me anything? Harold took a step forward. His voice, though calm, carried the firmness of a man who had nothing left to prove. You never asked me, Ava. You never looked for me beyond your own comfort zone. You built a version of our family where nothing and no one disturbed the surface. Not even the truth. The two policemen, still present, cleared their throats in confusion. The younger one, red with shame, spoke. Your Honor, we didn't know. Harold looked at them, his face softening slightly. I understand. You answered a call. You acted according to protocol. But now consider what these calls, based on fear, hasty judgments, and conditioned reflexes, lead to. He turned back to Ava, and this time his gaze was icy. Not violent, but merciless. You called the police on my granddaughter. A young woman you didn't even bother to stop, greet, or understand. You saw her, and all you saw was danger. Not a person. Not a possibility. Just a threat. Ava opened her mouth, then closed it. The words stopped coming. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd wanted to believe, that things were in their right place, that her family was just right, that this neighborhood was hers, was crumbling into a truth too naked to push away. Dad. I didn't know. I didn't imagine it. No. You didn't want to imagine. Imani, standing tall and dignified, hadn't said anything until then. But she sensed it was time. She stepped forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Ava's. There was neither anger nor condescension in her voice, just a quiet lucidity, that of a woman who had learned to exist in a world that often denied her. Madam. I'm not here to disturb your comfort. I'm not here to provoke, nor to make any demands. I simply came to see my grandfather. To reconnect. To discover a part of my history. If that bothers you. I can't do anything about it. But I came in peace. His words hung in the air like a final lesson. Ava looked away, unable to answer. And in that moment, the clean facade of Wellington Heights had never looked so fragile. That day, Ava Reynolds walked home without saying a word. Her usually closed and controlled face was marked by a new confusion. Her step was slow, almost uncertain. The flowers she had watered earlier seemed to wilt before her eyes, as if the light that had bathed the neighborhood just hours before had disappeared along with her certainties. She climbed the steps of her porch as if in a dream, opened the door quietly, and then collapsed into her beige armchair in the living room. Around her, everything was in its place, the cushions lined up, the books neatly arranged, the curtains drawn to the same height on both sides. But inside her, nothing was in order anymore. The shock of being publicly reprimanded by her own father, a man she thought she knew inside and out, shook her. Worse still, she had been confronted, without filter, with what she had always denied in herself, her ignorance, her intolerance, her confinement to a narrow vision of the world. She saw again the gaze of that young woman, Imani, so dignified, so calm. She thought again of her own words, which she had never thought she would say out loud, and which now sounded like accusations against herself. The daughter you had with that black woman, she had spoken of Imani's mother as a stranger. As an intruder. When she was her stepmother, her own father's partner, her half-sister's mother. A shiver ran through her. She had never tried to understand. She had turned a blind eye. Out of laziness. Out of fear. Out of conformity. Out of comfort. And now it all haunted her. Across the street, the porch of the gray house bathed in a warm, golden light. The setting sun painted the sky with orange highlights, and a light breeze rustled the leaves of the old magnolia tree that stood guard in front of the house. Imani sat in a wicker chair, holding a cup of tea. The scent of jasmine hung in the air. Opposite her, Harold Reynolds, her grandfather, drank slowly, his eyes fixed on her, almost in wonder. He looked at her as one would contemplate something precious that one thought was lost forever. "You know," he said, breaking the silence with a raspy voice, "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Too many silences. Too many compromises. Too many things I haven't been able to face." He put down his cup and folded his hands on his cane. "But finding you, it's maybe the right thing I've ever done." Imani looked at him, her eyes bright but without tears. She wasn't a woman who cried easily. She had learned to stand tall, to respond calmly even when everything inside her wanted to scream. But now, she felt seen, heard, accepted. "I'm happy to be here, Grandpa. Even if it's not easy." He nodded. "Nothing worthwhile comes easy. But today, you broke a barrier. The barrier of ignorance. And perhaps also the barrier of fear." He looked at the peaceful street, with its perfect lawns and smooth facades. "One day, maybe, Ava will understand. Maybe she'll start to see." Imani smiled softly. "Not out of naivety, but out of measured hope. I don't need her to love me. I don't seek her affection. But maybe in time, she'll come to respect me." Harold placed his hand on Imani's, with slow, modest tenderness. "And that's the whole difference. You don't ask for anything. You simply are you. And that's enough." Silence returned, but this time it was no longer a void. It was a rest. A moment suspended between the wounds of the past and the dawn of a new bond. A few weeks later. A soft, quiet morning dawned over Wellington Heights. The trees, now golden with the dawning autumn, were dropping their leaves one by one, carpeting the sidewalks with a ochre and red carpet. The air carried a scent of change, the kind only the seasons can whisper to those who will listen. Imani stepped out of her grandfather's living room, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, to collect the day's mail. Among the official envelopes and flyers, she noticed a small, thick card, unstamped and unaddressed, simply slipped under the front door. She turned it over. No name on the front, just handwriting, shaky but legible. Intrigued, she walked back in, put down her cup, and gently opened the card. The interior was plain. No drawings. No ornamental signature. Just these words, handwritten, with care. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to learn to see differently. Maybe you could teach me. Ava." Imani remains motionless. She read the card once. Then a second. Then a third. Each word seemed heavy, as if it had been taken not from a dictionary, but from an inner struggle. It wasn't a grand statement, nor a justification. It wasn't a letter laden with good feelings or promises. It was a flaw. A crack in the wall. A beginning. She placed the card gently on the table. Then she went to sit on the porch, in the same wicker chair where she had drunk tea with Harold a few weeks earlier. The wind blew gently. A leaf swirled down to his feet. She looked up at the sky. The clouds were sliding slowly by, as if they knew that all real change takes time. And in his mind, a thought imposed itself, simple, clear, anchored. Change doesn't always come with drums. Sometimes it comes with a shock. Sometimes with a fall. And sometimes, with a silent card, slipped under a door. She didn't know yet if she would answer. But she knew she had been heard. And that, in itself, was a victory.